Okay, I'm back. All right, so if you have survived the FAFSA update, you are now ready to go into the 2022-23 financial aid update, where I give you all the exciting federal and state updates. Very cool. So the first thing is just to have a quick refresher on what a FAFSA EFC is. The EFC is this expected family contribution. It's the number that pops out when a FAFSA is fully processed by the U.S. Department of Education, and it determines eligibility for need-based financial aid and federal Pell Grants. And when schools are figuring out how much financial aid somebody qualifies for, they use a need analysis formula, where they take a school's cost of attendance. So every student, every school is going to have a different cost of attendance, and that's direct billable costs like tuition and room and board if you're on campus and different fees. But also on the cost of attendance are things that are not directly billed, like an estimated amount for books and transportation and personal expenses. So all that is somebody's cost of attendance for, let's say, 1 year. And then you subtract the expected family contribution from the FAFSA, and whatever's left is somebody's financial need. So you have to have financial need to qualify for certain kinds of need-based aid. If somebody has a zero EFC, in theory that means they have the maximum amount of financial need, because if you look at the formula, a cost of attendance minus nothing means the full amount of financial need. And they would also get the maximum amount of federal Pell Grant in theory as well. So just to kind of have that refresher on what a FAFSA EFC is, I think is helpful. So now let's go ahead and move into the federal and state update. We don't know what the federal Pell Grant is going to be for 2022-23 yet. We normally find out from the federal government sometime in February. So for right now, we're in October 2021 right now. I can only give you what the federal Pell Grant amount is for this year that we're in right now. And so the current maximum for somebody who's full-time and has a zero EFC is $6,495 for the year, which is fantastic. And this year, the federal Pell Grant cuts off when the EFC hits $5,846. So anyone with an EFC higher than that would not be getting a federal Pell Grant. Schools also have federal campus-based aid, and that's where the government gives each school a little bit of money and says, hey, here's your allotment for a federal SEOG grant, or here's your allotment for federal work study. And the school gets to determine who gets what and how much. Because the funds are limited, not everyone is going to get a federal SEOG grant or work study job. And it has to go toward the neediest students first. But it's also first come, first serve. So you might have students who apply to several different schools, and maybe some of the time they get offered an SEOG or work study grant and program, and sometimes they don't. That's how the cookie crumbles. So just kind of letting your students know that financial aid can really vary at every school they're applying for is very helpful. Now, one thing you may want to do is sort of promote some of these scholarships that they're not very common, but it's hard for students, it's hard for us to find students who qualify. So sometimes it's helpful if they know that this is available to them. So for example, the Children of Fallen Heroes Scholarship is a federal grant. It's when a parent or a guardian was a police officer, firefighter, or public safety officer and died in the line of duty. And the student would have had to have been under the age of 24 at the time of the parent or guardian's death. If the student's already Pell Grant eligible, what will happen is the Pell Grant will move to the maximum amount. So their EFC won't change, but their Pell Grant can actually go up. There's something similar. It's the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant. A parent or guardian is in the U.S. military serving in Iraq or Afghanistan and was killed in the line of duty after September 11th of 2001, and the student is less than 24 years old at the time of the death. Same kind of deal. If the student is Pell eligible, the Pell Grant will just ratchet up to the maximum amount. But what's different about the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant compared to the Fallen Heroes one is that if the student is not Pell eligible at all, they can actually get an Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant. So I haven't seen any student receive this in my 11 years, and actually 20, as long as these have been around. They haven't been around all 23 years, but I haven't come across a student who's received these. But like I said, if you know a student who's had a parent pass away due to this, it's good to kind of let them know that such a thing exists. In terms of federal student aid, there's also student loans. And with a student loan, repayment begins 6 months after the student stops attending at least half time. Now, there's a tiny, small loan origination fee, so a little less than 1%. And there is a fixed interest rate, which is nice. So every student gets the same interest rate. Again, we don't know what the interest rate's going to be for next year. I can only tell you what it's going to be for this year. We'll know next summer. But for right now, the student loans for undergraduates, the interest rate is fixed at 3.73%. And some students with need-based qualifications, so if they have a low enough EFC, may be offered a subsidized student loan. Up to $3,500 if you're a first-year freshman might be subsidized, and that's where there's no interest at all accruing while you're in college, which is pretty amazing. So dependent freshmen can be offered up to $5,500 in a federal student loan. If they have high need, $3,500 of it might be subsidized, and the other $2,000, just regular old traditional unsubsidized student loan. And if the student is independent on the FAFSA, they can be offered more. Or if they're an upperclassman, they can be offered more. In the past, if you've heard me talk about the subsidized loan limit, it was called SULA for short. This was a rule that was imposed a few years ago that said if a student can't finish their program within 150% of how long it should normally take for them to finish the program, they're not going to qualify for a subsidized loan anymore. And they actually risked having their subsidized loans converting to unsubsidized loans. I know that sounds really confusing, but it really kind of hurt some of the community college students, because if a typical associate's degree takes 2 years to finish, the government wanted them to finish in 3 years. Well, that can be kind of difficult, because what if they change their program or something else? Happily, just so you know, this crazy rule, SULA, was eliminated. So if somewhere in the back of your mind you had to yourself, oh, there's some issue with subsidized loans, that's gone. Now, there are still lifetime loan limits in effect. You know, you can't borrow a loan forever and ever. You do hit ceilings when it comes to student loans, but this in and of itself is good news. You might also know that since March of 2020, the government automatically froze most student loan payments and flipped the interest rates to zero, which was a real relief for a lot of people. That's kind of supposed to end and everything go back to normal this January, so January 2022. What year are we in? January 2022. Just know that some of the companies that have been servicing federal student loans are exiting the business. So Fed Loan Servicing, Navient, Granite State, they all have been working for the government and handling student loan repayment. They're not going to be around anymore. So the government is in the process of trying to help those students who had those lenders have a new servicer to deal with. And they're trying to get everything ready for COVID benefits to end. The other thing that you might want to keep in mind when you're meeting with students and parents or giving a financial aid night is to let them know about the Parent Plus loan option through the federal government. It's an acronym. PLUS stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. And what's nice is it allows a family to apply for an educational loan directly with the government. The school actually helps them do the paperwork sometimes. But they can apply directly on studentaid.gov. And there is a loan origination fee. It's over 4%, so that can be kind of steep. So if a parent borrows $10,000, let's say, the school is only going to get $9,500 and change of it. So that's kind of, it's several $100s in loan fees there. The interest rate's the same for everybody. It's fixed at 6.28%, so that can be a little high. Some families with really good credit would prefer to get a loan from some other place, so like a private education loan from a bank. But if someone's credit is kind of mid-range, they may actually really like this option. And the parent begins to repay the loan 60 days after it's been fully dispersed to the college. They're able to borrow up to the cost of attendance minus the other financial aid, and there is a credit check, but it's pretty lenient, so that's one good option for families, especially if they're trying to pay for room and board. Now, when it comes to federal student aid, there's a big change ahead, and I think it's going to really kind of shock a lot of people because there's a lot of changes coming to the FAFSA and the way we award out federal aid, need-based aid, and Pell grants. So the FAFSA Simplification Act was passed this past December, and it was effective starting this July. But some of the changes are taking some time for the government to implement. So effective with the 2024-25 FAFSA, which will be opening up 2 years from now on October 1st of 2023, there's some really big changes. So by law, the FAFSA will have no more than 36 questions. Right now it has like around 100. And if you think about it, I mean, first name, last name, middle initial, address, city, state, zip, phone number, email address, date of birth, we're already at 10 questions. So considering they have to have parent information, some other things on there, you can imagine how many of these questions are going to be missing off the FAFSA. The good news is the IRS data retrieval tool and link will be automatic, so the parents don't have to struggle through that. But as you know, not everyone can use that right now. So I'm kind of curious what they're going to do for maybe families who don't file taxes or have trouble using that. I get the impression they're removing certain untaxed income questions because they've said child support received, which is in an untaxed income area, is being moved to an asset section. So my guess is they're moving some things around behind the scenes. The other big change that's going to be kind of a big paradigm shift is they're getting rid of the word expected family contribution, or the phrase expected family contribution, or EFC. They're renaming it the Student Aid Index, or SAI. It's still an indicator of need, but what's weird, it's possible for it to be a negative number. So right now, the lowest EFC you can have is a 0, but the SAI can go as low as negative 1,500. So that's kind of interesting. They're also changing how Pell grants are going to be calculated. So right now, we just have a handy-dandy chart. You just look at a cost of attendance on one axis and EFC on another, and there's your Pell Grant. But what they're going to do is they're going to look for maximum and minimum Pell Grant eligibility based on the number of parents in the household, and family income is a percentage of the federal poverty level for that household size. Then any mid-range Pell Grant eligibility is going to be calculated by taking the maximum Pell Grant and subtracting that student's SAI, and then rounding to the nearest $5. I have no idea what this means. I've looked at this so many times and I'm confused. So I don't expect you to understand what this means either. I'm assuming there'll be lots of trainings and hopefully you don't really have to deal with that this much. But just know that it's going to be very different in a couple years from now. Also effective with the 2024-25 FAFSA opening up 2 years from now. Divorced and legally separated parents who live apart, okay? Who you report as a parent on the FAFSA is going to change. So you're going to choose the parent who financially supported you more in the prior tax year. So the income year, the tax year that's going to be on that FAFSA. This was sort of the situation many, many years ago, where families will say, well, who claimed me? Or, that kind of thing. It's kind of going back to that because I think what needs to happen is the FAFSA is going to be linking up with the IRS system automatically, and it kind of needs to do apples to apples. So whoever the student was claimed by that year, it's going to be looking at that person's tax information. Any family business and farm asset exclusion rules are going to be removed. So that's going to kind of hurt some people, I'm guessing. Some state income tax exclusions, which are behind the scenes and impact the EFC formula, or in this case, the SAI formula, will also be removed. So it really doesn't matter what state you live in anymore. And there's no more number of children in college. So nowadays, if you have 2 students in college at the same time, the EFC is sort of halved because of this, multiple kids in college at the same time, and they're going to be getting rid of that. So it may actually, it's supposed to benefit a lot of families, but some of these changes are sort of concerning for some people. Also, for informal marital separations, if you're not legally separated, I get the impression that they're going to consider you to be still married for the FAFSA. And the family size is going to be based on IRS tax rules for dependents, not what we're used to. So where the dependent person lives matters. It can't just be financial support. Siblings have to be under the age of 19 or under 24 if they're full-time college students in order to be included in the household size, and so on and so forth. I don't want you to get confused because I know that, this kind of is backwards and kind of opposite for what I've just been talking about in the last presentation about the FAFSA. So don't watch both these presentations and then say, oh, I can't remember what's on the FAFSA now. But there are a lot of changes coming. So you may want to say to your families, hey, if you have a child going to college in a few years, don't assume that this financial aid night is going to be all you're going to need to know. You're going to have to come back. So we have time, yay, but everything is changing a lot, significantly in the next few years, the FAFSA especially. So you're probably going to want to prepare for that. The other thing is, if you have publications or your website and it talks about the EFC, eventually keep in mind you're probably going to have to change that to SAI and some other things. Now, in terms of state student aid, an important point is that there are different grants depending on whether a student is attending a public or a private school, college or university. So public universities have some discretion with awarding their grants, and their grants tend to be need-based. So for example, a large one, the Virginia Guaranteed Assistance Program, or VGAP, for the publics, it's need-based. So the student needs to fill out a FAFSA, and the award amount varies because the schools determine who gets it. So that means if you have a student who's applying to 3 different public state schools, even though their EFC on the FAFSA is the same, each school might offer them a different VGAP award. Students have to be full-time and meet certain GPA and grade progression requirements to keep it. So it's not, even though it says Guaranteed Assistance Program, the student does have to do their part with doing well in school in order for it to really be guaranteed. There's also a Commonwealth Award, which doesn't require the student to be full-time, but it's also need-based. The award amounts vary. And a really handy resource is going to chev.edu for details on each of these state grant programs. They have some really great information there, and charts and tables and things like that. Another great thing that publics offer, in this case community colleges in Virginia, is the Fast Forward Grant, which was known formerly as the Workforce Credential Grant a couple years ago. If you go to fastforwardva.org, you can find out more information about this. But this is available at Virginia community colleges, and it's meant to help people afford industry-based certifications and licenses. So this is not for someone going for an associate's degree. It's for someone who's going for classes that are not necessarily credit-bearing in order to get a certification or license to enter the workforce. So this is a really great program. I encourage you to tell your students about it if you haven't already. The other newer one, this is newer, is the tuition-free community college in Virginia, which is known as G3, and it's G3 for Get a Skill, Get a Job, and Give Back. And you can share the virginiag3.com website with families. And these are for people who are going for, I think most cases they're going for a degree, but I think that some certificates qualify in either early childhood education, healthcare, information technology, public safety, and skilled trades. So there's a lot of different areas, places where the state really wants to increase people entering the workforce. It is a last dollar grant. Money is not guaranteed for everyone. The funding is limited, and it is income-based. So students should fill out the FAFSA and apply for this early. Get with their community colleges, apply. There's different procedures at different community colleges. Some at my training were saying that they look automatically to see people who qualify, and others are saying, no, our students have to apply. So don't just assume that the procedure is the same at each community college. For privates, universities at a place, let's say like Hollins or Roanoke College, the tuition assistance grant, also known as TAG, is not need-based, but the student has to be full-time. This year it's $4,000 per student, and it doesn't matter what their grades are or what their family income is. It's just $4,000 for everybody. If you're attending an online program, you might be eligible actually for only $2,000, not the full $4,000. That's a different rule. It's kind of been going back and forth with the state. In fact, at one point they were saying if you were in an online program, you couldn't get TAG at all, but they've kind of stepped back, which is good. There's also the 2-year college transfer grant. So that's if someone gets an associate's degree at a Virginia community college and then transfers to a certain colleges and universities, they might be able to get an additional $1,000 or $2,000 under this program. Now, what's nice is it's also available for dual enrollment graduates, so that's good too. It is need and merit based, so you have to have a certain GPA, and your EFC on the FAFSA has to be below 12,000. There are also newish state laws that I mentioned these last year at our training, but I know a lot of people didn't get to attend the training. So during 2020, there were some changes to the law, the Code of Virginia, and one of them is codifying a current practice where if students, let's say, are Virginians, but their parents didn't have a legal status, that might have given them a hard time to try to establish domicile in Virginia for in-state residency. But they're allowing some leniency in that where, it doesn't really matter necessarily what your parents' citizenship status is. If you can show that you're a Virginian and your parents are Virginians and you're permanently here, you should be able to qualify for some in-state tuition. They also had some criteria for military dependence exemptions and trying to extend in-state tuition eligibility to new classes of students. For example, students who are DACA students, refugees, and special immigrant visas, things like that. So trying to help make in-state public education more affordable for more people. And the tuition equity provision from 2020 said undocumented students may qualify for in-state tuition if they complete 2 years of high school in Virginia, complete their high school education in Virginia, so they earn their diploma or GED here, and they file state taxes for at least 2 years immediately prior to beginning their college enrollment. So that's also very helpful for these students, and this is for undocumented students, but they can't have an F visa, which is a student visa, J, M, or H3 visa. It's because those are students who, under those visas, you're not meant to stay in the country permanently. This is to try to help our undocumented students at public schools. But here's the cool thing. There's a new tuition equity provision that goes into effect this year. And this is where undocumented students may qualify for in-state aid, including TAG. So that's on top of in-state tuition rates. So this is kind of helping students at more schools, both public and private. Now, the interesting thing is these students can't complete the FAFSA. They could technically, but maybe they don't feel comfortable completing the FAFSA, and they're not going to get an EFC. So what Virginia is doing is they're creating their own application form to determine financial need. It should be available in November or December, they're hoping, of 2021, and it's going to be effective for the 2022-23 year. The goal is for it to mirror what the FAFSA asks so that the state can determine someone's need level for in-state aid. Now, if you're undocumented students or students who are not U.S. citizens that are using, that want to apply for financial aid and that are looking for outside scholarships, here are some resources that I gave last year where you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to qualify for the scholarships that are included on these websites. So this might be another resource that you can share with your students. So some good news for them. Our last little bit here is just talking about the FAFSA professional judgment process, which the U.S. Department of Education has really asked for us to spread the word about. When you're filling out the FAFSA, it's going to be your 2020 income. Well, the recession happens, so what do? Well, you let your families know that there's such a thing called a FAFSA professional judgment. And basically, the professional they're talking about is a financial aid professional. So each individual college can decide whether or not they're willing to update your FAFSA to project what your income really would be for, let's say, 2022, or what certain conditions are. So how that works is, let's say a family suffered from unemployment or the joy of retirement, or there's some kind of reduced income where the tax information on the FAFSA really isn't accurate anymore. Or maybe, God forbid, they have unreimbursed medical expenses that are really high, or other unexpected expenses, like maybe they had a flood in their house or fire damage or something else like that. What they would do is the family would fill out the FAFSA with the actual 2020 income information, but then they would submit a request for a professional judgment to each college and any kind of documentation. So, for example, proof of unemployment or proof of the expenses, things like that. And if the financial aid administrator feels that there is some kind of qualifying condition, they can update the FAFSA and flag it as having a professional judgment. So really the only people who can do this are financial aid professionals. In theory, the turnaround time should just be a few weeks. It shouldn't drag on, as long as the student is providing the necessary documentation. And what we're trying to do is either project income or reevaluate income, so that's the whole purpose. And that might qualify the person for additional financial aid or even a Pell Grant. Well, thanks for virtually participating. If you have questions, I know this is kind of difficult because we're not really interacting, it's just me talking at you. But if you have questions, please call me, email me, let me know what your questions are, and I'll be happy to help you through. And I just appreciate all you do for your families and for our community, and I'm here to help you any way I can. All right, be safe and take care.